Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have some very mind-blowing and horrifying video evidence to share with you. I also have some very life-changing encounters to share with you. Before we jump into those, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They all were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon and please, folks, leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload. Shall we? So we'll start it out with some video clips. The first two video clips I want to share, I've seen the second one before, but I never really gave it too much attention. And I was sitting there last night looking at it, and I watched it on my computer, and then my phone again, and then on the computer. And I started to look at the movements of these creatures' arms and legs in like the joint movements, which I was looking at it as possibly being a primate, and it does have that primate stance and features, but there's something else that's off with this video clip, and that'll be the second video clip that you guys see. The first one is, well, you'll see. Let's get into it. All right, so you see what I mean? They're just how their appendages move. Just something seems a little weird for me. It may still be just a regular kind of primate, but man, it's just, they almost have this human-like kind of feature when they're down and looking. Their stance is all wrong to be a primate. And it really does have a human-like feature. So let's get into some encounters. Today's first encounter. Hello all, this is something I encountered when I was about 9 years old in the late 2005, early 2006. My memory is a little fuzzy on it. We moved into this modular home, think a trailer, but on an actual brick foundation in a rural area of Virginia in the summer of 2004. It was myself, my mom, my dad, my older sister, her husband, and their child, my niece. I stayed home alone a lot after school and on the weekends due to everyone having to work, and my niece going to her babysitter's house. It was never big of a deal because my grandma lived across the driveway. We lived down a long gravel driveway that was off of the main road. I can't remember exactly when this occurred, but it was after my dad died in April of 2005. I was home alone after school one day watching The Weekenders on Toon Disney with my little Pekingese poodle mix, Clyde, on my lap while eating some pizza rolls. All of a sudden our huge, and when I say huge, this dog had no business being as big as he was considering what breed he was mixed with, Golden Lab Boxer mix Rudy, that we kept chained in the backyard started to bark. Not his usual, hey, I'm out of food and water or squirrel bark, but it was a violent, scary bark. I looked out of the back sliding glass door that goes to the backyard and saw him at the end of his chain trying to break loose and get at something in the woods. I can't really see what he's trying to get at until all of a sudden this creature walks out of the woods and stops right at the tree line. It was about 4 feet tall, walking on all fours. Its body was similar to a bear. It had brown fur, but its face was the most distinct feature. It was solid white, complete flat. It had 2 black slits where its eyes would be. No kind of nose was seen, and its mouth just hung open. A black void with no tongue or teeth that I could see from where I was. It looked in my direction, and I remember just being overcome with fear and dread when it looked over at me. I started to shake. I was so scared before I could even get off the couch to get to the landline to call my mom. It slowly backed into the woods. Rudy was barking and growling the entire time it was standing there, which was about 2 minutes total. And for at least 10 minutes after it left my sight before he finally calmed down. I called my mom, my sister, my Bill, my aunt, my uncle that lived behind my grandma, and then my grandma before somebody would answer. She told me to walk over, but I was too scared to go outside, so she came and got me. As a kid, I called it the white-faced anteater, and my family just dismissed it as me seeing things, even though my dog had seen it as well and was trying to get at it. My uncle told me it was probably a big-ass possum, but I knew damn well what a possum looked like, and this was no possum. To this day, I'm 23. I still have nightmares where all I see is this thing standing in my yard at the tree line staring at me. I always wake up screaming and sweating, and my girlfriend has to console me. Today's second terrifying encounter from the woods. This happened in the late 70s, as far as my dad can remember. Around 78, 79, when he was a teen out hanging in the woods with his friends. This was a ways outside of Meridian, Texas on a fall evening. My dad and his friends spent a lot of time messing around in the woods doing typical teen stuff, firing off bottle rockets, hunting raccoon, underage drinking sometimes, but this day they were going hunting for squirrel, so when they set out, my dad grabbed his .22. It was just a basic Ruger or something with a cheap scope on it. His friend had a really badass Weinreimer that wasn't scared of anything. He would run up to bulls and chase them. He would get into scraps with bobcats and would chase off raccoons. He was walking along with them in the woods this day. He said that there was an old creek bed they would go always to and mess around in. So that's where they started off. The walls of this creek bed were about 5 to 6 feet in height. So they hopped down into it and casually walked along, half-heartedly looking at the trees and such. All of a sudden, my dad said the Weinreimer started whimpering and wouldn't come any further. It hung back for about 10 feet from them, refusing to continue, no matter what they said. A few seconds later, he said that it tucked its tail and ran back off in the direction of the home. This made him confused, but they just shrugged it off, being kids. They took a couple steps further, and he said that up ahead, at about 60 yards, the creek bed took a hard right turn and elevated on the banks where some trees were. Now the sun was setting behind these trees, and beyond those couple of trees was an open field, so you could see the sun setting relatively clearly. His friend stopped him and said, "Hey, do you see that?" and pointed in the direction of one of the trees. My dad said that he could see an outline of something big and seemingly hairy behind the tree peeking out at them. They weren't sure what it was, so they called out, "Hey, we're just hunting, are we cool?" No response or movement. My dad thought it may have been some sort of huge porcupine, not uncommon to the area. Held up his rifle and looked through the scope to try and figure out what this thing was. Since the sun was setting behind whatever it was hard for him to see any detail due to the sunlight. But my dad told me what he could see freaked him out. He said all he could make out was this large, black fur-covered head and a shoulder peeking out. As he was looking at it, what he described as a large, monkey-like hand grabbed the tree trunk. My dad froze, and his friend asked him what he had seen. My dad just shook his head and handed his buddy the rifle. His friend saw it as well and was equally freaked out. They sat there for a moment, just staring at it, both of them, and whatever this creature was, not moving. My dad has always said that he didn't know what came over him, maybe just teenage hubris, but he suggested they go check it out. Both he and his friend clambered up the left side of the embankment, and when they got to the top, the creature had ducked back behind the tree. They slowly approached and circled around the tree, my dad keeping the rifle handy. He always said that he didn't know why, because that small caliber wouldn't have done much of anything against something that big. They both circled around the tree, and it turned out that there was nothing there. It was just gone. They didn't know where something that big could have run off to in such a short amount of time without them seeing it. But nevertheless, they checked the area out just to see if they could find any signs of what this creature was. Turns out they found 2 depressions where this thing had been standing. But due to fall leaf litter, there wasn't any definition to the tracks. He did say that whatever it was big and heavy. The tracks were about 12 to 14 inches in length. Then he went on to say that he estimated the creature to be about 8 feet tall at most. Other than the tracks, there was nothing else to be found. No smell, no fur, no additional tracks. Nothing in the tree itself, nothing. Afterward, he said they decided to just go back to the house and never really mentioned it to anyone or each other after that. My dad loves the paranormal, but is a healthy skeptic when it comes to stuff. That event, he says, made him a believer in Bigfoot. And after having my own encounter, I've come to believe in something as well. I'm not saying it's Bigfoot, but I think something is out there that has not been explained. Today's third encounter. I absolutely want to make it clear that this is true. My wife and I both witnessed this and will never forget what we saw. I'm a 43-year-old man, former Marine with a lot of time at sea. I'm a former railroader, so I've been to a lot of places that are just hard to get to for most folk. I've never seen anything like what I saw, and it happened on Highway 50 in between Penrose and Pueblo, Colorado. My wife was working a closing shift in Canyon City. I left Pueblo and made the drive west as usual. After she clocked out, we went and picked up our son from his job, only to find he wasn't working that night. On the drive back from Canyon Pass, you pass Penrose, and then there is a place I have always called the Big Hole. The Big Hole is actually called Pierce Gulch. There is a significant drop in elevation, then you immediately climb back out, hence the nickname. As we were approaching Big Hole at about 12:40 in the morning, something traveling from north to south crossed all four lanes and the median of the Highway 50 at an incredible rate of speed. We were the only vehicle out there at this time of night. We nearly hit it. It was roughly 3 feet tall and had long brown fur everywhere. And again, this thing was hauling ass, faster than any animal I had ever seen or heard of. My wife was dropping and our son on speakerphone. She startled and looked at me as I asked, "WTF was that?" By this time, we were down in the bottom of the gulch and heading back up the hill. We told our son what we had seen, and she got off the call. We discussed it for a second and decided to go back and see if maybe it had gotten caught in the barbed wire fence or something. Maybe there was some trace of this thing. We both were amazed at how fast it was moving. By 12:45, we had traveled back to the west side of the gulch and turned around. There wasn't any traffic, so my wife just slowly rolled down the shoulder of the highway, and I had my window down and was shining my flashlight that I had in the car out into the field. There isn't much out there except for cactus and stuff. As we came up to the approximate area where we saw this thing, I told my wife, "Hey, look, do you see those eyes?" She said, "Yeah," and stopped the car. 10 yards or so on the other side of the fence was a pair of very bright blue eyes, not far off the ground. I was thinking we were probably looking at a coyote or something. It was looking directly back at us. What happened next, I'll never forget as long as I live. Whatever those eyes belonged to stood up like a man, like a 6.5 to 7 foot man. They were still looking at us. Whatever it was that flew across the road at like Mach 2, this was it. This was the hairy thing we had seen. There was a moment of disbelief and shock, and then it registered that we had found the thing, and it was not just some normal animal. Then the fear kicked in. I told my wife, "Go, go, go, effing go." It was like slow motion. She floored the gas. This thing watched us leave. We already knew this thing was incredibly fast, so as she drove as fast as she could up and out of the gulch, I was looking out the back window and checking the mirrors. My wife was afraid that it might be following us. It wasn't, and I didn't want to make things worse by admitting that I was worried too. We drove very fast for several minutes. We talked, but it was like we were talking to ourselves. Like, oh my God, what was that? And was it waiting for us? Soon, the lights from Pueblo West were ahead, and we were back in civilization. Once we got into the city, we finally started to relax a bit. We talked until we got home and then checked the car for anything. We couldn't really go to sleep for hours. My wife got online and was searching for anything that matched that creature that we saw. She found some stories, paranormal in nature, of people who had witnessed a creature that sounded similar to what we had seen. My wife does work that shift sometimes still, and on our way out to Canyon City, we've stopped and looked around, and we haven't found any evidence of this thing yet, but if we do, I'll let you guys know. Today's fourth experience. This is my experience. 7 years ago, myself and my wife purchased a property, 11 acres of woods, in a rural part of northeastern Minnesota. The woods were connected to a larger acreage of fields and woods of about 160 acres, and although sparsely populated, the land is near a fairly busy state highway. There are some housing developments in the area, but they are 3 to 4 miles away, and the majority of the land all around our property is farm fields, woods, and rivers. It's remote, but with towns so close, I wouldn't call it wild by any means. I'm mentioning this because I've heard many Native American legends of things in the deep northern woods of Minnesota and Canada, but the area in which we live is not that. Rural, yeah, but not the endless north woods. As I stated, I am not a believer in the supernatural, and have never been afraid of the woods or the outdoors, even though I have a healthy sense of caution and respect for large bears, moose, wolves, and other potentially dangerous wildlife. I'm also an avid hunter and mountaineer, and I've experienced many nights in the wilderness. I've had numerous encounters with dangerous animals or situations, so I'm not spooked easily. Knowing my state of mind is important to this because many so-called supernatural encounters can be explained by people with an already high belief, anxiety, or fear. And that's not me. Well, it all changed after the first few weeks of moving in. The house and land had been abandoned for a couple of years due to a foreclosure, so a lot of work needed to be done to get it back into shape. Wildlife have grown accustomed to no human presence, and black bears frequently roamed the yard at night, along with many other woodland creatures. We also found a lot of bones scattered throughout the woods, and coyotes were abundant. One night during those first few weeks, we had a rainstorm. I wasn't worried about a broken downspout potentially causing a basement leak. So, it was about 10 p.m. I grabbed my headlamp and headed outside to deal with the situation. Behind our house is a fairly large swamp area that divides the woods. I had my back facing this area, fiddling with the downspout, when suddenly I had this intense feeling of dread. It's hard to explain the feeling, but it was like my body knew something was behind me. It wasn't a normal feeling or observation. Never having felt this type of fear before, I tried to stay calm and slowly turned around to point my headlamp back toward the swamp. What I saw was something I still cannot explain. Eyes, numerous glowing, reflecting eyes staring back at me. These were not eye reflections that you typically see with deer or other animals, since they were at different heights, and when I pointed my headlamp spot beam directly at where you'd expect a head to be, there was nothing there except weeds and trees. When I turned the headlamp off, they were still there and glowing as if the light had been shined. They didn't move. They just stared through me. Needless to say, I bolted and ran as fast as I could back to the house and explained away as deer or raccoon. Later that summer, I was sitting out in the screened-in porch that partially faces the swamp and connects to the woods to the west. It was maybe 11 p.m. when I began to hear what sounded like a bear fighting with an attacked cow. Since there was a small farm to the southwest of my property, I assumed that perhaps a cow had wandered into the woods and had been attacked by a bear. I really didn't know if this was something a bear would actually do, but it was my only guess based on the sounds I was hearing. It was clearly some kind of roar like a bear, but then followed by a frantic-sounding cow's mooing. This went on for over an hour. It was perhaps one of the most horrible sounds I'd ever heard. It didn't really frighten me, since I had a rational explanation in my head. Even weirder, this same series of sound happened again the next summer. I never investigated the area of the woods these sounds came from, since it wasn't my property. A couple years later, I had a chance to purchase this area and 70 acres to the west, which consisted of woods that connect to mine, as well as a few tilled fields, more woods and ponds. As part of the purchasing this land, I, of course, spent a great deal of time walking around it to get a good understanding of its value and layout. As part of my walk, I was able to get a much better look at the farm setup to the south. The farm did have cows, as I suspected, but to my surprise, the area where they were kept in was a long distance from my house, much too far for me to hear them, and the fencing was also extremely well built and electrified. Looking at it, there was just no way a cow was wandering off from that farm. I didn't really think about this fact until recently, but I feel it's best to lay everything out in chronological order. After obtaining the property, I proceeded to put up tree stands at various locations along the trail, along with trail cams in order to prepare for the upcoming deer season. One spot was a hilly set of woods where I heard those sounds many years prior. Again, I did not connect any of these two things until now. The area was very odd, as whenever I hiked through there, I always saw some new strange thing. One time my son and I found an old game snare tied to a tree with what looked to be dried blood on the bark. Another time we found at least a 100-year-old tree with a barbed wire fence completely spiraling the entire trunk, growing in and out of it in different intervals. I've also found many tree trunks with very large scratches or claw marks not resembling an antler rub, perhaps a bear. We'd almost always find dead animal bones in this area, and even this winter I found a couple of deer legs snapped and picked clean. My sons found numerous animal skulls out there as well. As I share this, I put a game camera in this area since I had seen tracks and signs and wanted to get a sense of the best places to hunt. I've tried one of their many seasons, and unlike my other cameras, I have never captured anything at all on there. Nothing. My son has posted there a couple times for hunting season and has mentioned the strange sense of quiet. He's used to forest sounds coming back after sitting still for periods of time. But in this spot, there was never a sound. He's mentioned hearing something walking through the woods, though. A couple of years ago, my son went out hiking in the woods to try to find me since I was out doing some forest management. As he walked through this area, he thought he had spotted me coming through the woods fast, but quickly noticed the walk and clothing were nothing like mine. He said the person he had saw did not notice him at all and seemed to be walking in a straight line, like they had tunnel vision. Seeing someone in this part of the woods in their direction of travel didn't make any sense at all. There'd be no reason anybody would be out here. Deep ravines and an uncrossable river. After he found me and explained what he had seen, I quickly went over to investigate to see our trespasser. I hiked quick for a while, but I never found anything or anyone. If someone was there, they either got picked up on the road or vanished. That same year, my son had a friend over, and they went late afternoon walk to the woods. As it began to get dark, they made their way back by walking the edge of the field that is next to this area of woods. As they passed by, they said they saw a figure a little ways off in the trees. Whatever they saw was near one of the hills in the patch of forest and seemed to be making some kind of hand gestures. It began walking slowly toward them. They called out, "Hey, hello!" He or it stopped still and said nothing. It was at this point the boys sensed something was not right and bolted toward the house. They rushed into the house and told me what they had seen, and of course I laughed it off as their mind was playing tricks on them. My son described the figure as very tall, like 10 to 15 feet, but with skinny arms, and its body was dark all over, not hairy per se, but dark. They even thought it was an animal at first because of the weird way it looked. He couldn't really describe it very well other than it's gaunt or skinny and strangely dark. Me being curious and protective, I was worried about them being trespassers, drug addicts, or both. So I told them I'd go take a look. They brought me to the area and pointed to where it was standing, and I headed into the woods. Since it was winter and there was snow on the ground, I thought it'd be easy to locate the tracks of whatever this was and find out where it had come from or went to. When I got to the spot, there was not a single track or a disturbance in the snow. There was no way an animal or man could have been in that area. No tracks left at all. They had either made it up or it was in their minds, and their mind had played tricks on them. Or, so I thought. To this day, my son and his friend still swear that they saw it clear as day and can definitely attest that that is their fright. My wife has also experienced strange thrashing sounds and other feelings of dread or being watched in parts of the woods, and generally refuses to go anywhere outside of the house. All of this brings me to, well, now, where I have suddenly realized that all these strange sounds, sightings, bones, and events seem to be centered around this one area. I'm just at a complete loss to what it all means. It's all too strange to really bring this up and discuss with people. So I figured I'd share it with you. Anyway, I'll continue to investigate on my end, but I'd love to see what you all thought about this. Today's final encounter of the second half. About a year ago, myself and a friend went hiking on a trail in Roan Mountain State Park up to the Peg Leg Mine. When we got there, we noticed that it looked like it was going to start raining, but we continued on. We also noticed that it was oddly quiet and that we were the only ones around. We went to the visitor center to see if anyone was there, and they had decided to close for the day. We debated on whether or not we should go, and eventually decided to go on the trail anyway. Once we started on the trail, it did in fact begin to rain, and then an eerie fog began to roll in. Well, from the moment the fog came in, I felt uneasy and never really mentioned anything to my friend. When we got to a flat part in the trail, this part was not too far from the mine, I immediately got the feeling of being watched, and from this point on, I was on high alert. When we got to the mine, we walked around the top of it, then went down to the mouth to take some pictures. This is when we heard loud sounds coming from the ridge above us. I told my friend that I think we needed to leave, and he obliged. On the way out, he was in front and I was in the back, and we started to hear this growl coming from behind us and the sound of something walking through the brush behind us. I told my friend to stay calm and keep his eyes on the trail ahead of us, and that when we could see a building of the visitor center to run. At this point he was freaking out, and I was trying to keep him calm. When we rounded the trail where you could see the building, we bolted, and the thing behind us came after us. We ran out of the tree line, but the creature behind us would not leave the tree line, so we could not see what it was. We did not stick around long, though. We ran to our vehicles and tore out of the parking lot. We still talk about it to this day, and we are still unsure of what chased us. My parents thought I was crazy, and others told us we imagined the whole thing. The ones did believe us told us that it could have been, I don't really know, some sort of Native American folklore. I'm just thankful we made it out of there alive. All right, folks, some very horrifying encounters to end the evening, but let's end it right. Let's end it with two more video clips. These two are definitely very strange and very compelling. Let's check them out. All right, folks, some very chilling video clips. What was that thing in the woods? Definitely not a bear. Most definitely not a bear. And that whatever that was looking through the window had a buddy. I don't know if you caught that. There was two of them. And when I first saw it, I thought it was a reflection. And definitely not. I'd like to thank Brad, subscriber of the channel, for sharing that video of the two creatures looking in the window. Really a cool video. And absolutely horrifying. If you look at it enough, you will start to make out features of its face. So, guys, with that being said, stay safe, happy, healthy. Please keep an eye on your family, your friends. It's up to us to inform them. We can't protect them because then we're putting ourselves in harm's way. All we can do is keep them informed, and whatever they want to do with that information, they can do. I am truly blessed to have such an amazing subscriber base. You guys make this channel special and make all the work that I put into this channel worth it. So thank you. God bless you all.